Welcome back to this study of the book of Colossians. Today we're going to be looking at Colossians, the first chapter, verse number 9. So go get your Bibles and read along with me. Now I'm reading out of the New American Standard Version. By the way, the New American Standard Version is only one of many great translations of the Bible. And it was the one that I used right after I became a born-again believer. I could not understand the King James to save my life. And I walked into a Bible bookstore one day and I said, "Do you have a Bible that I can understand?" And she said, "Yeah, I think in the back room there's one on the shelf." And I found a New American Standard Version of the Bible, and that's the one I've been reading and studying ever since. So I'm reading out of New American Standard. You can read out of whatever good translation that you have. But this is what it says in verse number 9. It says, "For this reason also, since the day I heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you be filled with knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding." Now, Paul has been talking about the things, he's been talking actually about the gospel and how the gospel has come to the Colossians. And again, I just want to encourage you to listen to the videos prior to this. But now Paul is changing what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about prayer. And Paul tells us here, he says, "For this reason also." Why? Because the gospel is being spread in the lives of the Colossians. Okay, that's the reason. Because I'm hearing about your faith. I'm hearing about your love. You know, so many times we neglect to pray for the successful things in life. But Paul is saying, he's saying, since I heard of it. In other words, from the very beginning, I heard about what God's doing in Colossae. And so he says this, "For this reason, since the day I heard of it, we did not cease to pray for you." You know, Paul was a man of prayer. Paul wasn't a man that was just a Bible teacher, a man who received great revelation of faith and grace. Paul was a man of prayer. Many times in his letters he would say, "I pray for you. I'm praying for you." The prayer that's found there in the book of Ephesians is a tremendous prayer. But we need to understand that Paul not only was preaching the gospel, and not only was Epaphras preaching the gospel, but they were together praying for this church. Notice the pronoun. It says, "Since the day we heard of it, and we have not ceased to pray for you." In other words, Paul's there praying together. He's praying with Epaphras, and we know that Timothy's also there. And they're praying for the church at Colossae. We need to understand that yes, we need to sow the seed of the gospel, but also we need to pray over that seed, even when it's producing fruit in a person's life or in a church. And so Paul says, we haven't ceased to pray for you. And then he goes on and he says, and this is what we're asking. He says, to ask that you might be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. What is Paul praying for? What is he not ceasing to pray for? That you would be filled with the knowledge. Now, this word filled, in the Greek language, it means to be not just kind of full to the top, but it actually means to be filled to overflowing. Now, what's he praying? He's praying for these Colossians that they would be filled to overflowing with the knowledge of God's will. He's praying that their knowledge would be, that they would be filled over to overflowing with knowledge. In what area? In the will of God. You see, the gospel is the will of God. It's what God desires for every person on the face of the earth. And so Paul is praying. He's praying over the gospel. He's praying over the seed that's been sown. He's praying for the Colossian church. Even though they're doing great, he says, I'm not stopping to pray. We are praying together. We are standing in agreement together. We are praying, and this is what we're praying for, that you would know the will of God. Now, many times people say, well, the will of God is, what does God want me to do tomorrow? Or what does God want me to do for my career? And you know what? That's part of the will of God. And it's something that should be prayed for. But Paul's not talking about that. Paul, and again, in the context of this, Paul is praying that the people would understand God's desire for them. What is that desire? That they would understand that God desires to redeem them from the curse. That God desires to save them from all kinds of things. That God desires to heal their bodies. That God desires to bring deliverance. That God desires to bring emotional wholeness. That's the will that Paul is talking about. He's talking about that they would have an understanding, that they would begin to understand the will of God. Wow. Just think about that. Here is the gospel been presented to the Colossians by Epaphras. And now Epaphras and Paul and Timothy and probably many other people are praying for the church at Colossae. And they're praying and they're saying, God, help these people to understand. Help these people to have the knowledge of your will. The knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. Not just the knowledge of the will, but that the knowledge of his will, the knowledge of what he wants to do in their lives would come along with wisdom, and it would come along with understanding. Wow, what a prayer. And we're going to look more at the prayer of the Apostle Paul in tomorrow's podcast. But do you understand how all of these things are now working together to bring great fruit into the lives of the Colossian church? Join us again tomorrow.